Thank you so much for inviting us to FOSS Backstage. I want to say thank you to the organizers. We are here to talk about three main things today. One is, what is Open Web Docs and what do we do? We've had that question a couple of times already. The second, of course, is how we sell documentation. Selling open source is hard. How do you sell something that is free? We're going to talk about how we do it. And then the third thing we're going to talk about is our thoughts on diversifying fundraising in order to protect project sustainability. This is something I think that is top of mind for so many projects, and there's not a clear solution. So that's what we're going to tell you what we think. So you can tell us if we're wrong. So this is us. We're Open Web Docs. We are Vinyl, Will, Estelle, Kyle, Eric, Dom, Rachel, Patrick. We also have Robert and Yaniv. We have Dan Applequist in the audience as well. So we are a pretty big group of folks. This is us at our offsite in London a couple years ago. We're global, just like documentation. Documentation is a global concern. We come over from all over the world. Geopolitics is a theme here today, so we just want to highlight that this is not something that stays within the borders. We're really, really different people. We have a lot of different things that we bring to the table, but one thing we share is a common belief that documentation is critical digital infrastructure. And I'm very curious how many people agree with me. Yay! You all love docs. We love docs. So we're going to build on that shared affinity for docs. I think one thing that is true is that an idea like this kind of becomes a belief when your idea is tested. And for us, that opportunity to test our beliefs happened in the fall of 2020. One of the most important partners that we have in web platform documentation and supporting web platform documentation had a round of layoffs that had affected the entire team behind MDN, which is an important source for web platform documentation. That team went from 7 down to 1. And we knew that we had to act really, really quickly in order to protect this resource, because not only was the team that had all of this knowledge at risk, but also the risk of entropy for all this documentation came into play, and the risk of losing all of that institutional knowledge was pretty high. So we knew if we didn't do something quickly, if we didn't activate, we would be in pretty big trouble. Fortunately, we had some pretty important partners in the project who were able to step in and help us. And we'll tell you a little bit more about those people. But our origin story is an unfortunate or fortunate example of why we talk a lot about diversification in open source. So, we talk about diversification sort of in terms of contributors, but also in terms of funding, because companies typically support open source in a few different ways. One is that they fund open source contributors or maintainers, full time. They hire them, they pay them salary to support a project that matters to them. A second might be that they hire third-party contractors or vendors to do that kind of work, so they outsource it. Or three, they rely on a community to kind of provide stewardship or maintenance of that kind of stuff, and that can happen through either a foundation, for example. They pay into a foundation, or maybe they're providing sponsorship for a couple of open source developers on a platform like GitHub or Open Source Collective or Patreon. We believe that, of course, it takes all three of these kinds of support in order to support critical digital infrastructure, because all three of these different ways of funding carry different kinds of risk for a project. So one is that, obviously infrastructure is typically associated with cost center work like IT. So what's that? It's really work that enables profit center work. So it's something that you do to hopefully reduce. The goal is to reduce costs in order to maximize profit from the profit center. In 2020, MDN was predominantly supported by one company, and it was predominantly supported through that FTE B2B work. So when there was an event with that company, it was definitely exposed and at risk. Another type of risk here is that infrastructure is often maintenance work. It's not flashy stuff that ends up getting shown in, your product launches and stuff like that. It ends up being kind of the quiet labor of maintenance, and so it makes it hard for you sometimes as a project to showcase that. And then finally, of course, infrastructure relies on humans. You cannot take the humans out of the equation. We do everything that we can to maximize the use of automation tools, of new tools like AI to help drive, the cost and overhead down. But at the end of the day, we need people who can carry the institutional knowledge forward and can maintain that system so that they train the next generation to, again, maintain the system and so on. So these are some of the challenges.
Yeah, so I want to spend some time on talking what we're actually doing. I've seen lots of hands up for support for documentation already. That's great. So what does documentation actually bring to the table for open source in particular? I'm a strong believer that documentation can reduce the complexity and understanding of systems and entire ecosystems. And that's what Open Web Talks is for. Like, we're a collective that wants to help you all understand technology. And in our case, it is the web platform. It is all these things, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, that happens in browsers and in open standards. And in our ecosystem, in our world, the art of maintenance can look a bit like this. So we're not alone in this. We have other partners, especially over in the W3C, that is taking on a lot of standardization work in the open, and other standardization bodies, also browser makers, browser engines. But it is a really complex environment. If you're a web developer, then you probably know that this ecosystem can be weird and complex. But I'm really here to maintain this tech stack and to advocate for it, because I think it's open and it's better than proprietary vendor locked-in ecosystems, especially on the mobile market. And so the art of maintenance for us is to create positive feedback loops within the organizations that care about this open web platform. And so we're here to keep up maintaining the documentation, and keeping up with best practices and guidelines, how to use this technology stack. And yeah, the way we're doing that is largely through documentation. We're creating an information architecture to untangle this complexity and to make it understandable by everyone, to produce things on the open and to use open standards and the web platform. And we're doing that in a documentation system, which, if you're a tech writer, you might be familiar with this. This is the Ataxis system. So it's not just we're writing words up and then suddenly it's usable pages. We're actually creating an information architecture here, and MDN traditionally is very strong on the reference part, so we're maintaining all of the reference pages for the web platform, but also we're thinking a lot about when does a developer need what sorts of information when. So it also comes down to creating how-to guides, tutorials, and guides as well. And so we're doing that. We're doing that on this repository called MDN Content, which is published under CC by SA, and we're just contributing to the content. We're not a publisher on our own. So there's Mozilla, who publishes the developer.mozilla.org website, and they're a publisher of this content that we help produce. There's also DevDocs.io, which is a part of the Free Code Camp initiative. There's even AIs. There's the ChatGPT that probably has scraped either the website or this content repository and is making use of the information, the educational material that we're putting out there. And we like that. We want this information to be spread far and wide, no matter who is the publisher. What we care about is the content, and we act also as a firewall between the publisher's interest or like a single vendor's interest. We are funded independently of all of that, so that we can have an independent editorial voice and act as a firewall to all these publishers and, these learning portals that say, like, you can have this knowledge for free, and if you want to learn more, then, well, you have to pay or something like that. We don't want that. We want this open technology stack to win, and therefore we put out all of the documentation in this repository that can be spread far and wide on the internet. And then we're also doing the same thing for browser compat data. Again, if you're a web developer, you might be familiar with sites like Can I Use, but also the compat tables on MDN. And here it's very similar. We're working on the data and keeping that up to date, and we publish it as CC0, and we want the entire industry and the entire tooling for the web platform to use it, independent of Can I Use or MDN WebDocs. And I want to give a shout out here to the Sovereign Tech Fund, who actually invested in this particular data in 2023 and 2024. We are aware that it's quite a challenge to keep up with, to update this data set and to keep it accurate, because the browser versions, they release a new version every 4 to 6 weeks. So there's a lot of innovation in the web platform field happening. And so we, together with an investment from the Sovereign Tech Fund, we actually came up with a way to more systematically and automatically figure out an up-to-date data set for what technology works in which browser. And so again, not tied to a specific product, independent open data that we consider relevant for the entire industry and critical digital infrastructure.
So here's our governance structure. This is how we, Florian's just described what we do. Here's sort of how we set up our governance to support that work. Because the web changes rapidly, there's a fairly high coordination cost, and so our structure is set up to support that. We are very, very grateful to the open source collective as well. Just for some context, in 2020, we approached them with emergency. I have $100,000. I need to hire somebody now. And Pia Mancini from the team, and now Ben and Lauren and team, were very quickly like, yes, we will help you. So thank you guys so much for your support. They agreed to enter into that agreement so we could hire Florian, we could hire the other team, and offer full-time employment in locally compliant currency for those people. And they provide our fiduciary oversight and our accounting support and our operational support so that we can roll this platform. And of course, on the open WebDoc side, following traditional kind of open source governance structure where we've separated the money and the tech, so we remove the pay to play. The technical decision making is all handled by the WebDocs. Our governing committee handles sort of resourcing and finding new opportunities for funding and support. Our steering committee works with the community to scope specific project and maintenance needs, and then of course the staff and the community execute those things. So guess how much we have raised? That's the question. How much would it cost to do all this? Any guesses? Somebody throw out a number. How much? 200? 200? Yeah. Okay, that's a good guess. But it's $3 million. We are an outlier on the platform. We know that. We raise between, in order to support that staff and to support the contract work, we have to raise between $600,000 and $800,000 a year in order to keep that support up. It's not cheap. It's not cheap to do this kind of work. And I think it's important, to kind of highlight that. That's about 6% of the funds per our math. Ben and team could correct me. So again, to hit that target, we have to sell documentation is critical digital infrastructure every day. This is not something that you can just sort of tin cup. This is hard. It's not easy. Asking for money is hard. It's not a skill that I think most of us went into open source to do. is my theory. Some projects are really, really lucky. They have maybe a scale or a support structure that means that perhaps there are strategic partnership people or marketing people or biz dev people who are also helping to support the financial needs of the projects. But for most, that's not the case. And so, like all infrastructure maintenance work, we have to practice every day selling documentation. It's not easy, and we're going to share a few challenges and opportunities about how we do that.
Yeah, so my background is actually technical writing, so I've also had no idea how to sell documentation, so I had to grow into this role in the last 1 or 2 years and figure this out. So there's a few challenges that we've encountered in the last year or two, or even more. We're in the 5th year now, and one of the challenges is that currently lots of people are looking into this. Like if you type npm funds, and then there's a lot of packages asking for money on various platforms, and if I would just want to give $1 to all of them, it would be fairly impossible. Oh.
Your headset is gone.
Oh, it's gone. All right. All right. Cool. And so I think one challenge here is that, on the dependency tree for traditional software development, docs is often an oversight. Like it doesn't show up. That's not quantified where the developer experience, what it costs, what it brings. And so this has been a problem, and we're discussing with ecosystems. That's a new effort by the Open Source Collective, how to make this better. But yeah, it doesn't show up there, and we need to do better here. That documentation is seen as something that that should show up in these dependency lists. Another challenge is, and I've touched on this, documentation is not a product for us. We're not a publisher. As I've said, we're not a learning portal that tries to monetize the content through advertisement or to subscription model or all these things. We're not doing that. We want this information to be available for free for everyone to use, and no matter the publisher. If you want to produce a book from our stuff, go for it. Do it. If you're building a clever AI, even do it. But ideally, also contribute back to us if you're doing that. There's also an opportunity here, especially with all this AI rising and stuff. Lots of people are telling me as a documentarian for years that, we don't need documentation anymore. We don't or 5 years ago, you're not doing video tutorials yet? Why? No, I mean, technical documentation is still the #1 way how people learn to code. And this is from 2024 on Stack Overflow. I can, if you want, I can send you a lot more surveys that prove this. Technical documentation is still the way to learn how to code. And it's also shown on the, if you look at traffic of one of the main publishers like MDN WebDocs that have millions of users on a daily basis that rely on this information to be there and to be accessible. Then there's also an opportunity here that if you care about your technology stack, I think this morning we heard from Utah that good open source projects, good open source software needs to have good UX as well in order to be usable. You also need good DX, so developer experience. You need documentation for your technology stack in order for it to be usable, accessible, and understandable by a large audience. Otherwise, it's not gonna be it. And so I really documentation, do it. And then what I also like is that documentarians, they act as as a translator often between standards bodies or engineers, and they actually make that usable for a different audience. So when a browser engineer talks about a new technology, well, then they come from their Rust or C++ background and talk about their thing. But it's not the same as if you want to bring this in front of another audience that is web developers. So think about your audience, think about who you want to bring it in front of, and how documentation can help you to drive adoption for your technology.
So I think a lot of people have been hitting this point, which is that in order to kind of build the business case for supporting open source, we need to use business language. And in this room earlier today, Georg Schumacher is back there, had a great talk. Please watch that. But it's just the economic case needs to be made. We're really good as open source technologists, speaking passionately and excitedly about why our work is important, like socially, culturally, morally. We're not always good at using the language that business decision makers need to hear in order to make the case to give you money that matters, right? And so I definitely want to encourage folks to think about bringing in that economic language, because it makes a big difference. And then I'm having kind of a hard side. Yeah, and so we also have to have support from our users and our supporters. We have lots of folks who love docs. We have to give them the language that they need to help, because we're glad that they give us a little bit of money on, GitHub sponsors, for example. But we also need to give them tools to go talk to their VPs about why the VP should give us like multiple X's of that. So here's some of the things that we do really quickly. Yearly reports, we give us kind of the data about what we did, why we did it, what the impact of it was, why it mattered. That's a great asset. If you're not doing that for your project, we highly recommend that you do something like this. It's something that your fans can then use and share too. We also talk to our funders about which metrics matter to them. And that's sometimes a weird conversation to have if you haven't had it before. But if you know what they're going to be looking at, and then you measure that, and data, we've got all kinds of receipts, right? Tell us which receipts you need, and we will give them to you because that's going to help them make the case. So, for example, we don't want our expensive engineering staff spending time on docs. We got you. We also really encourage projects to work on defined scope timeline projects, and then think about what the economic benefit of that project is going to be up front instead of after the fact. So a couple of quick opportunities. In the interest of time, I'll speed through this because we want to have a conversation. Tech writing is not typically something that's rewarded on the marketplace. That's a challenge for us. We've been hit by the layoffs probably more than others. So I've got a lot I could say about this, but I'm going to move on fast. And then the plus side is it is something that the community rewards. The plus side is that if we have a open source project, we can really empower the community to make contributions back to continue to support the main project instead of splintering off and sort of doing their own documentation projects in isolation, which again leads to entropy in the platform. And they're glad to do it because it's an openly standardized platform.
All right, so lastly, we want to spend a little bit of time of how we think about diversifying our fundraising. So we just heard, like over 4 years ago, we kind of had this initial investment, and then we were like, oh, now we have money, okay, and now we got to go, and now we got to do this for longer, and then we need to continue to do it every year. And so there's different sources from us, different sources of funding that we have seen in the last 4 years. We've set up initially like memberships, so there's corporations that can become members at Open Web Docs. They support our mission, kind of signed our charter and are behind our values, and they pay like an annual membership fee. And we have a few companies that are doing that or have done that. There's a bit of variety, some come and some go. So that's one source. Another source is that there are one-off donations. So sometimes a company decides to donate into open source. Wonderful, and we get a one-off donation from some company because they were convinced what we have done in a year, or they like our mission, but they just do that once. Then we've also taken on some grant applications and LNet, others. And then what we've also done, especially last year with the Sovereign Tech Fund, is that we have seen targeted investment to kind of innovate or to maintain or to work on a specific project to achieve a task or to better maintain the open source projects that we're supporting. And then finally, as Jory said, individual donations, where like you can sponsor us on GitHub as an individual. Those are mostly web developers that read our stuff on a daily basis and be like, wow, this has helped me. I now understand cores and fetch and all these APIs. I want to give back. So we have seen a bit of a development in our fundraising throughout the years. So in 2022, it was almost completely just company memberships, and like very few, like I don't know, maybe $2,000 or so of individual donations. So yeah, but we were able to diversify that further, in especially in 2023 and then in 2024. And so for us, it's not just diversifying of the funders of the like increasing the number of annual memberships, but it's also for us the diversifying of the funding sources. Like, and so we have this plan or this idea in our mind that we would love to develop this sort of rubric for our funding sources. There's always going to be maintenance, and we hope that our annual company memberships will kind of take care of that. So that's like half of the chart here. Like 50% ideally is coming from these annual memberships, and they sort of keep the lights on and help us maintain the documentation, the data, and that sort of stuff. Then we believe that about 35% should be backed by project works, by investments such as the Sovereign Tech Fund, who decided, yes, Compedata, we want to make an investment here, or I think it was Google who invested into better documentation for security, so that web developers know how to secure websites. And then we're a bit ambitious here. As I've said, we don't have a product where we can actually advertise for giving us donations, but hopefully also more individuals would see the benefit of donating to us. But we see that more as an engagement metric into our community. So
yeah, so we need your help. The question that we want to put forward is, do you think that, and we think this is, but we need your help answering, is this rubric or this model, sensible for maintaining documentation? Because when it comes to critical digital infrastructure, the cost of keeping it up is not the same as the cost of fixing it once it fails. Like when it fails, like it's a little too late. It's like a lot more expensive. So we want to know, from you all, just like, if there was an investment, if you could think of it like an investment portfolio, balancing your funding sources, what does good look like? What does a balanced portfolio look like? Here's what we're doing to try and work on developing that business model. We are trying to address the concern about institutionalized funding. What do I mean by that? Companies and grant makers, once they give you some money, call it $100,000, they don't want to see that what they're going to have to do is always give you $100,000 year over year over year. That depresses them. They want to, figure out how are you going to be sustainable on your own. But at the same time, some of this maintenance work kind of does require institutionalized funding, so there's a little bit of a gap there. What's churn look like? What does good churn look like? What do I mean? If you pay for a membership in year one, there is maybe some expectation that, say, 20% of your memberships is going to drop off at the end of year one. You've got to replace that revenue. What does a typical churn pattern look like? OSC may be able to look at the data and tell us kind of what that could be. I don't know. And then two, like finally, what types of funding support which types of activities? As Florian was saying, like the sponsorship that you get on Open Collective or on Patreon or GitHub sponsors from individual developers for $5 or $10, which is wonderful, is probably not going to help you support, really big, costly infrastructure. But what is it telling you? Is it telling you that there's a lot of movement in this? Is there a lot of engagement? And is this the right way of looking at it? I would love to know that. So I think 1 minute. Yeah, I think we'd really like to stop so that we can get a question in. So, because, is there one question maybe in our 1 minute? We do want to talk about this with you guys.
One of the things that is missing, obviously, or maybe not obviously, is any kind of trying to turn the attention that you're getting in terms of people's time and energy and eyeballs into donations. Can you talk a little bit about what you've explored in that? Because I'm certain that you've thought about it.
Yeah.
How you could support that through more open licensing with certain partners, perhaps?
So, if I understand your question, you want like how we get our funding partners like Microsoft or Google to.
So more specifically, Can I Use is using your content. Have you ever had a conversation with them about the licensing restrictions and kind of, changing that for them in order for them to bring some of their support?
We very specifically don't want to be in the business of telling other businesses how to business, right? It's like what they do with our open source is it's openly licensed. If you want to use it to go, as Florian said, make money on that, that's your right, and that's part of the beauty of it. And so I don't think we've ever gone.
I tried to explain this earlier, but there's this difference here that we're not a publisher. We're just caring about the docs and the data on their own, and we get that out in the world, and people do stuff with it, and we love that. But then, as Jory said, yes, these publishers or these projects then need to decide on their own if they want to contribute back into our work or not.
I think we're out of time for questions, but find Florian and I. We want to continue the conversation with you all very much. Thank you so much.